meeting of the Cleveland County Board of Education for Monday, August 8th is called to order. First item is adoption of the agenda. We do need to add one item to the agenda, and that is a closed session transfer hearing. That'll be after board member comments and before adjournment. What's the pleasure of the board?
Make a motion to approve. Second.
Motion by Mr. Fitch, second by Mr. Blanton. Any questions or discussion? Those in favor, please raise your hand. That motion carries 9-0. Tonight's meeting is a joint meeting between the Cleveland County Board of Education and the Cleveland County Commissioners. We do want to thank our commissioners for being here. Chairman Gordon, Vice Chair Harden, Commissioners Hutchin, Wetstein, and Bridges, thank you for being here. I also have the County Manager, Brian Epley, County Attorney, I started to call you Steve Moore. I'm sorry, Tim. Tim Moore. You've been called other things, right? And County Clerk, Ms. Phyllis Nolan. Appreciate you guys being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Gordon to handle some parliamentary procedures on their part.
Thank you, Robert. We look forward to being here tonight. We look forward to hearing this report. We've awaited that for a year or so now. We look forward to hearing that presentation here shortly. So with that, I'll call to order the Board of Commissioners. Madam Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Yes, sir, we have a quorum.
So at this time, I entertain a motion to reconvene from our last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
So motion second. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. First item on the agenda is motion to adopt the proposed agenda that you have before you. So at this time, I'll seek a motion to adopt our proposed agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. All right, Robert, that's good for now.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Next, we have our invocation. We have Pastor Tom Runyon from Beaver Dam Baptist Church. Pastor, if you would come to the podium, please.
Let's pray together. Before we pray, I just want to share with you, I had breakfast this morning at Crest Middle School. Had liver mush and eggs with educators this morning, and they were excited about the upcoming school year. I just want to give you two thoughts before I pray. I want you to think about these thoughts. I sat there at that table with my wife, middle school counselor, 33 years in education. It's amazing to see the devotion in that school today. And I thought to myself, we have such a blessing of educators in this county. It is amazing. And we've been given a sacred trust with these kids. And I want to pray for you guys tonight and for those teachers, a sacred trust and a blessing of great teachers. Let's pray. Father, we do thank you for this day. This day has proved what a beautiful day you have given us, and it has proven beyond all doubt how much you love us and care for us. Father, I thank you for our educators. I thank you, Lord, for the call that you've placed on their lives to serve children and to serve families. And so, Lord, so our children can grow up and be good citizens and blessings to other people. Lord, we have such a sacred trust in our schools and with the decisions we make as we counsel together. And so, Father, I pray for unity in this board. I pray for wisdom. I pray, Father, that the sacred trust that they have and the blessing of the resources that we have in this county would be ever before them as they work together to glorify you and to honor the citizenry of this county. Thank you for the good minds you've gathered this evening. Help us, Lord, to come together and to reason together. Bless them. Bless our teachers, bless our students, and bless this very hour as you work your way and will. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Next, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Hunt, you'd lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
Next, I'd like to recognize any other guests we may have in the audience. Do we have any other elected officials with us tonight? I haven't seen any principals or assistant principals. Any teachers with us tonight? All right. For all those in the public, we welcome you tonight. Before I introduce our speaking guest, to allow for some open discussion amongst the two boards, I'm going to ask our parliamentarian to move as he sees fit to do so.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to suspend the rules so that we may have open discussion in real time between the boards during the MPS facility study presentation.
Motion by Mr. Humphries. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Fitch. Any questions on that for the school board? Those in favor, if you'd raise your hand. That carries 9-0. I'd like to introduce our speakers tonight. We have McMillan Pasden Smith with us. MPS is a regional studio-based architecture, planning, and interior design firm. We've been practicing since 1955 and have offices in Charlotte, Asheville, Greenville, Spartanburg, Columbia, and Atlanta. With over 250 employees, their services include master planning, programming, architecture, interior design, graphic design, and construction administration. As mentioned, MPS is organized in several design studios such as healthcare, industrial, and education. Mr. Ben Thompson, one of the presenters tonight, is director of the K-12 studio, specializing in K-12 educational space. Ben has a Master of Architecture degree from Clemson and is a licensed architect in multiple states. Mr. Hamilton Court is the project manager for our facilities assessment. Hamilton has a bachelor's degree in environmental design from NC State and a bachelor's degree in architecture from UNC Charlotte. He is a licensed architect in North Carolina. Mr. Peter Nilsson is the project architect and school assessor. I think he's the one that did all the work. I'll give you that credit, Peter. Peter has a bachelor's degree in architecture from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and he is a licensed architect in North Carolina. There were several other firms involved in the study. We had CMTA provided the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineering. Benesh and Company provided the civil engineering. SKA Consulting Engineers provided structural engineering. REI Engineering did the building envelope assessments, and Palacio Collaborative provided cost estimating. So it was a group effort with a lot of smart people, a lot of design professionals have had their input. Just to let you know a little bit about MPS, the top three things that stood out to me when we were going through the selection process is the fact that they have a dedicated K-12 design studio. They have staff dedicated to that space, and that's their specialty. Some of the information you see tonight, their assessment software and their reporting program, they developed that in-house. That's proprietary to them. We'll have access to that after the study's completed, but they took that work upon themselves. Thirdly, demographic studies were an integral part of their assessment strategy, and a lot of that was done in-house also. Personally, I've found Ben and Hamilton and Peter to be very thorough in their work and responsive to our requests. And it's obvious that they have indeed walked through our schools and to record the current conditions and provide recommendations. So Ben Thompson, I'll call on you to start, and you guys proceed as you see fit. And board members, commissioners, and school board, if you have questions as we move through, please feel free to speak up, and we'll get those answered as best we can. Gentlemen?
Great, thank you, Mr. Queen, for those kind words and that great introduction. I'm Ben Thompson again with McMillan Pasden Smith. This is Peter, the guy who did all the work, right? And Hamilton Court. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. We're entering into a pretty big milestone in the work that we've been accomplishing over the past year. So glad to be in front of both the commissioners as well as the school board. One thing that I wanted to just also let you know, in addition to the myriad of engineers and cost consultants and demographic folks, is we have a wealth of assessors within our firm here in both in Charlotte and in Asheville, and all of them were used when we went and validated the condition of each one of those schools. So you might see the three of us, but there's actually a team of 10 back behind us that went inside of each one of your schools and evaluated them. in that way. And I'd start by saying thanks. You know, it takes a lot for this process to kind of unfold at the behest of the school board, of course, and Dr. Fisher and his executive staff's time. So thank you very much for everyone who's put the time and effort into getting to this point. And I can tell you, just based on the way that this has unfolded, it really is good data out because we've had good data in so far. So thank you for everything that you've given us thus far, and really the results of the reports will bear that weight. So we have a couple of things to go over this evening, other than just the introduction to our team. We really wanted to focus on two main components, which are the demographic forecast and building utilization study. What that means is we've looked at the trends that are happening here in Cleveland County as far as your demographic profile. That helps the demographer forecast what will be in the future from a current citizen standpoint, from a current community standpoint. Then it also, in tandem to that, we're looking at space utilization. How well are each one of the schools and campuses being used? Those two data points together really help you form a plan of action, and you'll see a little bit about that this evening. Secondly, the facility physical needs assessment. That's the big part of the report. Both of these components are going on at the same time and really coming together here at the end. That starts with in-field review, but we're also assessing, once we get back into the office, code, ADA, we mentioned some of them, and really trying to make sure that we capture everything that we know and can see about each one of the facilities. So those two pieces, we'll get into that, and as a result, that allows us to really evaluate it from a cost perspective, kind of overall, to let you know temperature-wise where you are right now in terms of maintenance over the next 5 to 7 years. So, first and foremost, process. It's a big task, right? So we divide these things up into several manageable chunks as we go along during that process. But really, first and foremost, we're here to ask a lot of questions. That discovery phase, that really big part of the first part of this assessment process, is asking about how you're using your schools. What's the energy consumption of your schools? What's the enrollment that has historically been at each one of your schools? So we're asking a lot of questions, collecting a lot of data, and that's in addition to what we're doing in the field as far as the data collection side of it as well. Once we collect that data, that allows us to really assess and appraise the condition or the use or the cost, and really compare that to what's going on in the environment around each one of your schools overall. At the end, our entire goal is to help the school district to make data-driven decisions, and really that goes into how do you approach maintenance planning systemically over the series of years that will be required to make those improvements to each one of those schools. So that's really what we're here today, this evening, to talk about, is the draft and the completion of that maintenance plan for the school district overall. I would just mention, in addition to that, it's not just us and it's not just the team here at the district office. We did, as part of the work here, engage each one of the principals at each one of those schools, a select number of teachers, maintenance staff at each of those schools, and in fact, we did a district-wide teacher survey to really understand how teachers think about their building. That was really interesting to understand not only what we see with our eyes as architects, designers, and engineers, but how teachers view their schools as well. So that's certainly part of all the schools. We looked at, here in Cleveland County, you've got about 30 facilities, 27 of which we reviewed. Most of the other ones were newer schools and didn't really need additional review at that time. So first and foremost, we'll get into the demographics here. First thing that you see is that red box. That is the enrollment at the time we took and began the demographic study. So the district was My eyes are a little rusty, but a little over 14,000 students in the year that we began this process together. You can see just to the left of that red box are the previous overall enrollments at the top, and then the grade level breakdown by color from pre-K all the way up to 12 down below. What you'll notice just initially is slight decrease since when this was taken. You can see also to the right of when this was taken that you see a slight increase. Now that's controlled as part of what happened during COVID, but also how the demographer looks at enrollment from a population standpoint. What the demographer did was he took a lot of information as part of his work from census data, from local economic development data, certainly birth and death rates, as well as a number of other pieces of information that the state provides to really forecast that data overall. So in all, you will see as part of the reporting in front of you, some of the information in the bigger binder are his takeaways from an executive summary standpoint. There are 9 main takeaways demographically, and we're looking at the overall very high-level demographic information. I'll just hit on a couple of them. Of your existing, in your existing population, he found that most, the records were saying that most of your population is aging, starting to age. So meaning that you're going from a district median age of 42 to about 43.1 by the end of the study. So from 2020 all the way to 2030, slight aging in your population kind of overall. That's an important factor as you kind of build a enrollment forecast, because the older that you get, the less likely you have kids coming into elementary schools and beyond. So that was one finding that he had. In fact, overall, if you look at the population profile of Cleveland County, it's below the replacement level of 2.1, meaning that it's really reliant on people coming in if there is going to be an increase in enrollment. Where those might come from would be large influxes of commercial development, industrial development, or institutional development, resulting in greater numbers of households in the school district. So those were the 2 main findings that he pointed out. As that relates to how he built his model, he noticed overall, and one of his takeaways was that the population decrease that the county has overseen over really the last 10 years has really leveled off. And that's a good thing. From a demographic standpoint, what we call that is very stable. It's very stable. It goes up and down based on how many kids may be in one grade or the other over time, of course. But one of the main takeaways is that your enrollment, as a result of your population shifts, is fairly stable. That's a good thing from a planning standpoint, because you know what you have and you know what to expect from a number of students standpoint, kind of overall. He did note, last point here was there'll be moderate decreases between 2021 and 5 years from now, so 2026. But then total enrollment is about level. He says decreases about 125 students overall, but that just means, and that's across the entire district, that means very, very consistent, very, very stable kind of overall. That does not mean that you're not growing in some of your areas. You may be decreasing in some, you may be growing slightly in others. So really important that we go not only from that very big level, but we did go zone by zone with the demographic reporting to understand where those growth patterns would be here in Cleveland County. And what we did next was pair that versus how you're using your existing buildings. These are charts of the open seats available as we looked at each one of those schools. The big graph on the left are The available seats that are open, if you look at all schools in Cleveland County, a portion of that 14,000 student enrollment, there's still available about 28 seats based on the current configuration of your schools and how they're being used right now.
28 or 2,800?
I'm sorry, 2,800. My bad. 2,800. Yeah, 2,800 seats available. Now, that breaks down in different zones in different ways. Of course, I started with the Kings Mountain zone. Here on the left-hand side, you'll see the locations of those schools. And then on the right-hand side, the utilization factor. You've got about, I'll round up a little bit, about 4,000 seats in your current enrollment, and in the Kings Mountain zone, for instance, about 951 open seats available if you look at all the schools and bring them all together. On the left-hand side of that screen, we've color-coded the elementary zones, so you see that pinkish color. That means there is a slight increase expected in enrollment over 10 years. Slight in this case means anywhere from, I think it says 40 to 80, somewhere in that range. So not a tremendous growth, but a slight increase in enrollment is projected, at least in some of those area. The right-hand side, or the eastern side of the Kings Mountain zone specifically, is more of a neutral, not expected to increase or decrease in a tremendous way. And then to the west, some of those areas are expected to increase in only a very slight way over the next 10 years when looking at it that way. The Shelby zone, the next one over, same kind of analysis, looking at the current seats available versus your current enrollment, about 2,830 currently enrolled in the Shelby zone, kind of overall, and available seats in that case, about 259. And let me just stop right there and say that's about where you want to be. You want some open seats available so that you can handle those different groups of kids that are coming through that might be larger cohorts into a grade from year to year. So if you have a larger 8th grade, for instance, coming through for a year, you want to be able to handle that. So you do need some available seats in some of these schools to handle that overall.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
These numbers that you have here, is that the numbers that included Graham and Marion? Would those numbers, available seats, change since those two schools have been closed?
Yes. So on the right-hand side of the screen, the reason it's green and the reason that it's in good shape is because you did I'll hit the button, close, and I'll X out those two schools on the screen.
It's on the screen.
It's on the screen. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And it's because that we took away those two schools from the mix that you didn't have more available seats in the Shelby zone specifically. So, yeah, that's how the Shelby zone worked out from an attendance standpoint overall. The other two zones, Burns and Crest, the story is very similar for both of those zones. Some areas of very slight growth, some areas of slight decrease are expected over time. But with that being said, there are available seats as those either slight increases happen or slight decreases happen overall. Burns has about 990 available seats. Crest, a third of that, or about 386 available seats kind of overall. Anything that I didn't touch on there?
No.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question before we move away
Sure.
from this? And looking at especially, I say you had the Kings Mountain area
Yep.
that had extra students. Are you looking at predicted building permits? Because I understand Kings Mountain's got 3,000 building permits in 24 months. Also, City of Shelby's got a couple thousand. So what do you figure, like a household brings to the school system, 0.1 something kids per?
Sure. Yes. So we do look at that overall. We don't have a crystal ball, so the demographer is looking specifically at the information that was part of all the reporting. Now, when we get to the speculative side, which is I think where you're going, the number of housing units that are expected in a county, you do need to look at that from an enrollment standpoint to make sure that your schools can handle that. So I didn't know the answer to that question, so I asked our demographer that. So every household that comes online, you should expect 0.45 to 0.6 people per household that would affect enrollment, or students that would affect enrollment. So when you're talking about, your figures were 3,000 and 2,500, is that correct?
Something close.
Something close. Let's just call it 5,000 new housing units. So if you had 5,000 new housing units in Cleveland County, you would multiply that by 0.6 at most to get the number of students in pre-K through 12 that enrollment might be affected by. We did that math in each one of those zones and found that each one of those zones had a tremendous amount of capacity to handle that level of growth, even as the building permits have come in. It's a really good and interesting point, though, is that for school districts, we often see it doesn't really affect their enrollment until you get to the scale of 7,000 to 10,000 residential units ready to be built in the next 2 years. That's really when they start to feel the number of housing units in the schools in a very short time frame. And that takes a lot. 10,000 units is a lot. It's usually preceded by a lot of economic development, things moving into the area, industrial or commercial or hospitals or the like. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah, make a comment. So, as y'all know, I'm on the planning board in
Yes, sir.
Kings Mountain, and kind of looked into this. Actually have a planning board meeting tomorrow night that some of this is going to come up in. So, a couple of things I'd like to point out to everybody is that this is a district forecast. It's like a weather forecast. You do the best you can do. I was involved in traffic forecasting for years with DOT. You take the data you've got, you do the best you can do, and that's all you can do. You know, it's like predicting snow for Kings Mountain. It depends on where the warm front's going to be. It's impossible, almost impossible to know details. So there are currently 20 approved subdivisions in Kings Mountain. That's the 3,000 units that Johnny was mentioning. Right now, they have submitted preliminary plans. They're at that phase right now. Some of them are in the process of giving final plans for approval. So Crocker Road, actually, the LGI development there, from the point that those subdivisions and those units are at now, it took LGI 3 years to build 228 homes. So it takes time. Just because they're approved don't mean people are going to beam into them with children. And so now, of that breakdown, these are rough numbers, about 80% of the new homes are starter homes. Now, a starter home means something different than it did in the 20th century. Now, a starter home is $250,000 to $300,000. We've got about 15% move-up homes, and then about 5% senior living, which is lower than what I anticipated. So, and the other thing that makes this so mercurial from your standpoint is Kings Mountain's already at 49% rental. 49% of our homes in Kings Mountain are rented homes. D.R. Horton, who's getting ready to do some work, they're the largest builder in the United States, has changed their business model to they're either going to build multifamily or they're going to build single-family attached and plan to rent those out. So Kings Mountain's population is going to be, a big chunk of it's going to be rental. So it's impossible to predict students from rental property. You just don't know how long they're going to be there. So anyway, just kind of wanted to make that point. Yeah, it sounds big, but it takes time for this stuff to move along. You know, you're looking at a 10-year forecast. Of those 3,000 units, I don't know how many will even be constructed about 10 years out. So anyway, just want to make that point. Thank you.
Well, I think it's good to note, in addition to that, is that you're right, there is no crystal ball, but what we do as part of the work that we're doing here for the school district is that we reassess every single year to make sure that the enrollment is aligned with the forecasts. And when that doesn't happen, you know, there's a conversation and a look as far as, well, why is that doing? We can only forecast what we know at the time, absolutely true. But we can get a little bit better, more fine-tuned as we move through time and know kind of how many of those units are being built, how is that affecting the schools. And I think it looks and appears like you have a good short-term plan for Kings Mountain Zone specifically, and then you just look to certain triggers or parameters to make different decisions once those come along. But you're not at that point. The school district's not at that point, at least from a utilization standpoint.
Well, and I would also note that you correctly identified is the Beth-Ware district is where the vast majority of this development's happening in the Beth-Ware attendance zone.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, as he was talking Ron was talking a little bit about, you have to take the information you have, but I've been in construction all my life, and what we have found that a lot of the larger counties, say Mecklenburg, if they build a subdivision, they'll build it out in 1 year. But the average length to build out a subdivision in Cleveland County is 12 to 15 years. So that shows you that what we're talking about, 3,000 homes, is not gonna be tomorrow.
Sure. Absolutely.
Through the planning board in Kings Mountain, they're predicting over a 24-month period, 3,000 building permits. Check with your planning board and you'll find out. That's why I got my
I'm on the planning board, Johnny, but, so Johnny, the
Whatever,
point,
but the planning board says next 24 months.
yeah, the point I was making, Johnny, is that it took LGA 3 years to build 228 homes, LGI, excuse me. So, yeah, even though those 20 subdivisions have passed through the planning board, they still haven't developed their final plans yet. And once it gets to the final plan phase, it has to go through the technical review committee and a number of things to make sure the utilities are going to be available, so on and so forth. So it's a drawn out process, as Ronnie mentioned. It's going to take time.
Well, in the interest of time, as I understand, the circle graphs you're showing now are what we have now, current situation.
As operating.
And we've got some predictions, if you will,
Sure.
trending analysis later. So
Sure.
if we have more questions on this in the later portions, we can take it up again there.
Yep. That's great. So that's demographics and space utilization. There are a lot of different avenues. There are a lot of different parts and pieces to that, and that's included in the reporting, of course. But that's really the high level look at what are the demographic trends here in Cleveland County. What are the utilizations per school and per zone for us to look at. The other big component that we're here to look through this evening is really that physical conditions assessment. You may make decisions based on space utilization and demographics, but you also might make decisions based on how's the building operating, how old is the building, are there parts to the building that need to be renovated. Really, that's what we do in tandem with enrollment and population and demographics, is really look at all of the pieces of a building, and that's where these guys come in. So I'll let Peter speak to some of the things that we do from a process standpoint.
Yeah, if you just want to go back one slide. So in addition to, as architects, that's how we look at the building, all the components of it. But there's a few other areas we just kind of add to what we look at, just because we understand trends or things that if you were to do X amount of work at a school, it may trigger things. So we were looking at concepts with Green Globe, how is the building energy efficient, if there's ways of improving that. Also looking at current ADA requirements. So that being said, these are all existing schools, but again, if you do a certain amount of work at a facility, that may trigger you to make ADA improvements. And so that's what we look at those as well. So that way we understand, okay, if this happens, we have to do this. Also, with the ICA and SEPTED concepts of safety and security, like what are ways of improving visibility of the schools and ways of improving safety at school. So those are a few additional items that we look at every single school just to make sure we're capturing as much as we can in the data. If you click to the next slide. So this is kind of an example of what it's like going into a school. This is Township number 3 Elementary School. And so as you can see, there's all these little dots. It'll play a little video shortly. All these little dots, and those are individual items that we've identified at that school. And so as we kind of go around and we look at the outside of the building, we're looking to see if there's any moisture issues with any of the exterior cladding, and also many different components of the exterior. But we also go into each of the classrooms. What are the issues that are happening there? And every single one of these, at the bottom, there's a little thing called issue remarks there, what the issue is, and recommendations to repair those issues. And with that is the severity. So that way we understand, is it a 1 where it's critical, this needs to be fixed right away, versus a 5 which is brand new. And even for the one that's currently on the screen there, that is a old boiler at the school that is causing a lot of acoustic issues in adjacent classrooms. So that kind of gives you just a very short glimpse as to like what that process is and how we look at a building. Again, we're going every single school in the district, going room by room and just identifying those deficiencies. What this then generates is a deficiency report that goes to the maintenance department. And the key part of that, that's one of 3 reports that go to the district. That deficiency report, since you saw kind of on that map, every single deficiency is geolocated to that room. And we typically will put, if it's replaced 3 ceiling tiles, we'll have that information there. So it really helps develop that maintenance plan moving forward for the maintenance department. Like, here's issues, and over time, those items can be taken off the list, and you can kind of see the change in the school where they have issues and where they're getting fixed as well. So that's part 1 of the reports that we do, is that deficiency report. And I believe for the entire district, it was a little over 1,000 pages worth of stuff. That's not saying that's bad, that just means there's a lot of schools, and it's just every single thing that we as architects see, along with our engineers, like, here are things that can be improved, whether it's maintenance or capital improvement plans. The second component is, for the assessment recommendations, is the building summary. And at each school, it's about 268 individual items that we look at the building as a whole. So the deficiency report, you're going room by room at that specific location. For the building summaries, at the building overall, like, how many ceilings do you have to replace? Do you need to replace a roof at this facility? That's what that second report is the building summary. And that has some input from district staff as well that we walked around with, and recommendations based on their knowledge of the building, because they're in there every day and we don't necessarily see everything, but they help fill in those gaps with information. And the final report is the executive summary, and that kind of gives very brief descriptions. Like, here are the biggest items for the different areas that we focus in on. We'll get into those areas in just a second as to what they are. But that's kind of an overall view of each building, and that then applies district-wide. The scoring system that we have is 1 through 5, 1 being critical. This should be replaced very soon, whether it's roof issues or it's a safety issue, versus number 5. It's a brand new school or was built like in the last 5 years. You're not going to see a lot of issues in new schools. There's little things here and there, but that being said, you really, it's just because you're at a 5 doesn't mean you're not going to have issues in the short term.
Just one thing I would add here is that this process, these 3 deliverables that the school district gets, they're meant to make this a very active plan overall. It's not meant to sit on a shelf. It's meant to really give you an idea of how to get to better and improved schools kind of overall. We've done this process and used this method in 13 school districts, either partial or full, over the last 5 years alone. And those school districts are having really good results after going through this process and working through this reporting and these assessment reports overall.
And so we'll just do a quick, brief kind of rundown of kind of what those different areas of focus that we have. First is site, so looking at site circulation, do you have water drainage issues, athletic fields, that's typically covered under sites. BE stands for building envelope, so we go on the roofs. We look at all the exterior pieces of your building, exterior cladding, looking at all those items. Int is in for interior, so we're looking at finishes, ceilings, floors, walls, whether or not there's enough storage. As we know, typically there's not a lot of storage in schools, so we look at that as well. MEP, so looking at the existing mechanical systems, do you have enough supply with your electricity if you need to add additional supply for the school? And plumbing, do you have any plumbing issues that need to be resolved? And then the last category is health, safety, and security. That encompasses current ADA requirements, school safety, looking at the environmental aspect, enough air circulation going through the space to make it feel like a good classroom environment. So those are kind of those categories looking through that. And so what we've kind of highlighted here is kind of where we have the twos at different schools. And for example, like at Kings Mountain Middle School, we have 2 for building envelope. While the exterior cladding is for the most part really good, there's a significant portion of the school has a roof that needs to be replaced. So all of these are weighted numbers based on what the issues are and where it should be and where the focus of any investment, whether it's capital improvements or maintenance plans. This kind of helps guide that discussion with the district. And then so go to the next zone, which is the Shelby. So as you can see, there's a few schools that had some 1s in there, but as part of looking at the facility conditions assessment, as well as some of the space utilization, then we took from there, Marion and Graham were closed, and now what was Shelby Intermediate is now Elizabeth Elementary Schools. Again, Shelby Middle School, it's a new school, so something like that, you can understand why that would score higher than the others.
The whole point of us classifying them in this way is just so that we know, just because a school is in pretty good shape doesn't mean that we don't need to maintain and repair certain portions of it, and those might be different from school to school. So this is a good way for us to really understand and really convey to the facilities department, to the maintenance department, where the focus might need to be in the short term, kind of overall.
Yep. And then the last two.
Mr. Bland.
Yes, for an example, like on Crest and Burns, I've understood that the roof was pretty bad on Crest. How could Burns not be when they was built the same year?
It just depends on how the maintenance has been done on. That being said.
How the maintenance has been,
Yep.
okay.
Well, there's another piece of that, though,
All
is
right.
in each of those recommendations that does say to replace the roofs. Perhaps one of the bigger differences is the fact that I walked on Crest's roof the day it rained. So I'm seeing the full extent of which
Okay,
there's issues.
Does somebody need to walk on Burns the day it rains?
It would be recommended.
Yeah,
Okay,
I would recommend it for every roof. 'Cause
okay.
you learn a lot. Because you may not see, because you may walk in a building if it's been good out, if it's been sunny, and you walk the roof, you may not see a whole lot. But if you're there after it rains, you can get a full understanding of
Well,
like.
I know those was built the same year,
I know.
and, there can't be a whole lot of difference there in those 2 roofs. And then the 2 additions was put on at the same time, too, and, okay.
So, then, there's not too many other items from Crest and Burns. For the most part, they were, for the most part, mostly 3s and those, a couple 2s here and there. And for this last one, Crest has a 3 and a 1 for building envelope because the 1 is really focus of the roof. Again, walking it right after it rained, I really saw where all the ponding was. So that's the facility assessment process. I think the next part is the cost.
Pause there for just a second. Any other, there's a lot of information there, right? So, and it's both in digital format and some of it's in paper format in different departments in the school district. Are there any questions on facility assessment process before we move on to pricing? All right. Well, the fun part, right? Talking about dollars. So we've identified all these issues. We've classified and categorized all of these issues. The real challenge is to really understand, now that we've done all of this, how much is it gonna cost in today's dollars? So that we know exactly, with a pretty fine-tuned point, where you are as a district from a maintenance standpoint. Again, that maintenance is just to keep the lights on. This is all we're suggesting and recommending, is looking at each one of these facilities, what will it take over the next 5, 7, and 10 years to maintain these facilities, to make sure that they continue to be in fair and good operating condition. So we engaged a cost estimating firm, Palacio. Palacio we use for a lot of facility, both for facility design, new construction, renovation and design, but also for a lot of our facility assessment work. The reason that we use them is because they are really intimately understanding of the educational environment here in North Carolina and where prices are today. I'm sure everyone on this panel knows construction prices are a little bit different than they've ever been, for a number of reasons we don't have to go through this evening. They are truly a driver on how you use your dollar in the most effective and efficient way possible. But to start with, taking all that information, our team going through it with their team, their cost estimating team, really understanding each one of those facilities in that way. If we were to price everything today and just say every issue needs to be addressed immediately, what would that cost be? And what the cost estimator found was that cost is about $106.3 million, looking at all 27 of those schools at all of those different levels of priority over 0 to 7 years, kind of overall. Yes, sir.
Was these estimates taken during the same time you took the enrollment to 2021?
It was not.
Or is this updated as of today's inflation?
Updated as of today's inflation, and I asked specifically the cost estimator, when would you expect to readjust these numbers? And his answer to that would be next year. So this is his pricing strategy for now until the end of 2022, before readjusting and looking at it again. He also only assessed direct cost, and what I mean by that is what would it cost from a construction standpoint, not all of the other things a district might do in addition to that direct cost, whether that be cabling or furniture or permitting or engineering or our legal fees or printing fees. All of those other indirect costs he didn't account for. I'll account for them in a moment, but that $106.3 million just represents the direct cost of how the cost estimator looks at all of those issues that the school district had. If I break that out by school, which is also included in your packet, we color-coded those by zone, of course, so you can see some of where that value would be spent and spread across the district's portfolio of buildings. You can see most of the larger have to do with high schools because they tend to be the largest buildings. But interestingly enough as well, some of those have to do with some of the older facilities or some that we found physical condition problems that might need to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Do you know
overall.
what the North Shelby that you have here, it's not on this? So do we know how that, or what?
Sure, North Shelby was one of the 3 that we did not include inside.
We
No,
did.
not there, I mean over here.
Yeah, on that
Oh,
one, yeah.
okay.
So that's a district-wide facility. I believe the score for that was a 5, so we did not include it in that part.
But
it is
okay.
part of it,
Because there's no issues to report.
Very little, yeah.
Little to no issues to report, at least from a cost analysis
Okay.
standpoint. If we further break that out by zone, which is the next one, you can see there's a good bit from the Kings Mountain to the Shelby to the Burns zone. Most of those are pretty even from a cost standpoint and an issue standpoint. Crest is a little bit less it's about 15% of that total pie kind of overall. We also break it down by those 5 divisions that Peter spoke about. Site, building envelope, meaning roofs and walls, interiors, what's going on the inside of the building, mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, and health, safety, and security. that's really to understand, are there any trends that we could capitalize on potentially from a buying standpoint for the district overall? You might need multiple mechanical equipments at many of these schools, so maybe there's an advantage there, so that we break it down and categorize it that way so that we can look at different scenarios moving forward, kind of overall. You can see probably your largest bucket there are the mechanical, electrical, plumbing components of each one of your schools. That shouldn't be a surprise there. Some of the schools are older, and mechanical, electrical, plumbing equipment, as you know, from just what's going on in our economy and supply chain and the rest, is really hard to come by from a commercial standpoint. So that is driving a good bit of that cost kind of overall. Anything additional?
One thing about this cost is there are current mechanical replacements happening at high schools. That number, we originally had that in this cost estimate. We've taken that number out because since those are being currently addressed by the district, those were happening at schools, we took that information, or that cost number, and took it out of there, so we didn't inflate this number to include work that's currently being done at the district.
So the HVAC, you're saying from those 4 high schools has been taken out of the, and
Yeah.
it would, otherwise it's gonna be,
It
that
was-
$32 million that we're spending now on those 4 high schools would be added to that, is that correct?
Correct.
So, yeah, that way we took those out, that way we're not having inflating numbers about what's currently being done versus, if you were to bid this out in a year, because you wouldn't be bidding that
And
in.
that's including the windows and.
Windows at Burns, yeah.
That was pulled out too.
The
right?
windows, yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm not a construction guy. Would you give me a brief definition of building envelope? What that means?
Building envelope is what.
Envelope, yeah.
Yeah,
envelope.
it keeps the water out. So it's the roof,
Okay,
and then it's the exterior, we call it cladding, but cladding is like brick or metal panel
Okay.
or
It keeps the
Siding.
conditioned air in and the water out.
okay. all right.
Windows and doors.
I couldn't figure that out.
anything that keeps the rain out, the environment out of the facility.
One quick question to follow up on Ms. Harden. On that price per school, North Shelby's on there at 1.7 million. What,
The cost, the large increase in that one is an issue with the current detention ponds that are there, that the district is currently working with the contractor to resolve. So more than likely, that number is going to drop significantly, and that was the largest cost at North Shelby. Was that particular?
but the North Shelby's still in there, that 1.7.
So I mistakenly said that it's not included.
Yeah,
If it's in there,
yeah.
it's at a low level until that issue is resolved.
It's not a building issue, it's more of a
Site,
site issue.
yep, site detention.
Thank
ponds.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? All right, so direct cost, how do you convert that to actual dollars today? So if you were looking at how would we, I know you're not going to plan on doing this, but theoretically, how would you do all the things that are included in that report today? So you not only have to assess the direct cost, which is a significant portion of it, you do have to assess the cost of the other parts that you are going to, as a district, go through to get there. Some of those indirect construction costs might include surveys. They might include certainly technology infrastructure, bringing in path and power to each one of these facilities that the school district usually does. It might include furniture. It might include specialized equipment as part of what you're constructing. So all of those indirect costs have to be included to make it a real number. Then we always suggest that there always be some level of contingency. Contingency is really important today because of that cost escalation that we're all kind of experiencing. But also, I would say, as a practitioner, knowing and going through and renovating and adding to existing schools, there are some things that you don't know until you open up that wall. In an effort to kind of keep it very valid, to keep the district's risk low, we always suggest putting some level of contingency on top of a direct number so that when you run into unforeseen conditions within those potential projects that you at least have capital to cover those overall. In this case, the indirect construction costs, those can range anywhere from 23% to 37%. I think we chose the middle, 30% indirect construction cost on top of that direct construction cost, and included what we would say a minimum number of 10% as a contingency budget for all of these items, and that takes that $106.3 million to around reasonable cost for if you were actually to do it, about $148.8 million kind of overall. A little bit of an eye-opener, but that's to give you the best understanding of what level of value the improvements would be, at least in today's dollars.
And then that note underneath there where it talks about escalation and a master schedule. So really what you would do is you take 148 million in today's dollars and you'd say, okay, all the immediate priority things we want to do in the first 3 years. So you could use numbers that are similar to those numbers today, but those projects that you're going to take on 4 years from now, they're going to have to take on an escalator number that you'll construct over that next 3 years. So that's what that escalation number and the master schedule, where that all comes into play there.
Last thing I'd leave you with is that, I know it's a big number, and we're talking about a lot of the problems. You actually have a lot of great things going on in your school right now too, and really that's where we keep focusing the school district kind of overall is it's not just about the deficiencies, it's not just about the physical conditions, it's about how do we make a plan to improve each one of these schools kind of overall. What are the district's guiding principles? And that top guiding principle that we found over the last year, as stated to the facilities committee and in board meetings previously, was maximizing that operational efficiency and effectiveness so that key decisions can be made in maintaining and improving and changing schools to make it up to today's needs for each one of your students overall. With that, any other questions, our team would be happy to answer, and I'll leave you there.
Anyone else? I do have one.
Yes, sir.
I think you mentioned you performed this kind of assessment in several other districts. I don't remember the number, but how do we compare as Cleveland County Schools to other districts with the age of our buildings and all things considered? Are we doing okay? I'm putting you on the spot to either brag on our maintenance department or not.
Yeah.
And I think I know what the answer is, but, and with all of that, and 106 million, 148 million, large numbers, is there any reason in anything you've seen that we need to be scraping a building off and starting over, building new elementary schools or building new high schools?
Sure. Well, from the first part of your question, the maintenance side, if I was comparing between districts, actually you're in really good shape. And I'm not doing that just to say how great the school district is doing. If I compare it against the results that I have in those other facilities assessments, those 13 that we've done, a lot of those school districts have not maintained their buildings to the level that Cleveland County Schools has maintained their levels. So their price, their big number at the end of their assessments is much, much larger. It's either because they have number of schools they haven't maintained that are your size, they have 26, 28, 29 schools, or per school they're not doing as well as Cleveland County Schools is when you look at it at a per school level. So I think you've done a great job of maintaining. It's just at some point it becomes a tax issue really about, do you have the income coming in to pay for 15 different roofs? Do you have that amount of money coming on a fiscal year with the ability to really make an improvement one way or the other? So I'd say kudos to the district for maintaining the facilities that they have. You have a lot of schools in this county, and you've done a good job so far of maintaining. We're not just talking about bad things. We're really just trying to make sure that we're pointing you in the right direction to go improve the schools in certain areas and to the benefit. From a you said new school standpoint. From a new school standpoint, from the utilization side of that equation, there's no reason why you would want to add from a enrollment standpoint. There is projected growth potentially in some areas, but your portfolio can handle it. So from a utilization standpoint, there's no reason to scrape schools, so to speak, and just combine them or put them together unless, from a new standpoint. I think I'd point back to that first guiding principle there is that new school construction is really expensive. A new elementary school alone, gosh, $30 to $33 million is one that we're working on right now. And that's in addition to maybe some critical addition and renovations that you need to do on your existing campuses. So I wouldn't say that there are new schools necessarily that you would need to, or schools that you would need to scrape and start all over fresh. Now, there are probably additions and renovations that need to be complete, additions and renovations. But
So more or less for the cost of one new elementary school, we can
spread it out.
affect the repairs for a whole zone.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean, and a new high school right now is gonna, depending on the enrollment numbers you're gonna look at, it's between 75 and $100 million just for one high school.
I think what sets the district apart, a lot of the districts that we go into, there are 2 or 3 schools that are just ready to be scraped, and they really need it, and everybody's kind of known that around the county for a long time. And really, we feel like the schools that you've got, there are some that are aging that you may want to reevaluate after 10 years. But for the next 10 years, we feel like an ongoing maintenance program can get you through that 10 years.
One comment I'd like to make is, you look at the dates that y'all have indicated, like Bethware 1925 and Kaiser 1926 was the year they're built. That's kind of a little misleading because there've been a lot of updates and a lot of added buildings to that. So if you took away that older part, our numbers would look a little bit different, would you think? Because those older portions of those elementary schools probably inflate those numbers quite a bit.
Well,
Is that correct?
so anything that was in the cost estimate was based on what we saw at those particular facilities. So if there's for example, at Bethware, the Nanning Holland building, there's a lot of issues with those. We all acknowledge that, we all understand, and so that's where you're gonna find much more of that cost information is being invested if you're to renovate those spaces. But there, again, that's when we look at what's critical for that facility to either handle the existing condition of the building or looking at it from if you have any increases in enrollment. Can the school handle that with those spaces there now? Maybe not, but that's all part of what's built into all these reports is saying, here's the issues at the school. Yes, and we have all the information on here's the original builds, but here's also the years of any renovation that happened at the school, and that's in the executive summary for each of those schools.
And I don't think that the date of the school is really tied to any of the numbers necessarily. Yeah. So that we put that in for shorthand because a lot of this reporting is trying to consolidate the information down so you can kind of visualize it and understand really quickly kind of what you're dealing with. And to put all those dates in and try to maintain that shorthand and that easy to read prioritization gets difficult. So it's kind of a shorthand. None of the numbers are inflated by that number.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I've got three questions now, since this all a little bit of discussion got. Ultimately, that $148,835 or $835,933, ultimately, that's $180 million, because we've done set aside $30-something million, so we've got to take the whole picture in, because that there is still part of that building, and it's gonna be added over here, so we got to look at the $180-something million. My next thing was, you brought Bethware up, and I've brought that issue up quite a few times. How could it get all threes, and part of that building's condemned to a certain degree, and then you got a building over here that Kids can use every last foot of it, and it's got some tubes. I can't follow that direction there. And my third one, and then you can answer them both at the same time. On that ground site at North Shelby School, at $1.7 million, and you said basically that was site work.
Site.
I'd like to know what that site work was.
Yep, site and storage for North Shelby. I can tell that site and storage. So one of the items when we walked at that particular school was since there's a lot of specialty equipment that's required for that school, they're putting a lot of that into spaces that are more or less like closets, and that's additional storage space that would be needed for North Shelby. And yes, there is the issue with site detention that's there. But I do believe when we walked it, that is something that the district is currently talking with the contractor that did that work to find a resolution for that issue at North Shelby. Now for the Bethware should have 2 twos on it. One was for health, safety, and security, and the other one was for building envelope. And that is, when you look at the school as a whole, that's where the numbers come from. If we can't say, if we broke it up by, we've got.
Building.
Yeah, if we broke it up by building, it would be a different scoring that would happen for the entire school. So that's why, yes, you are completely correct about those spaces not being occupiable, the school as a whole has the scores that ended up.
Yeah, I know one part of that school very good.
I've walked to the basement of the space that's not suitable. Been there.
Thank you.
I've walked the space, so, yeah.
Any other questions from the commissioners?
Any other questions?
Anybody else? All right, thank you, gentlemen.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon, I believe you need to close out your meeting, is that correct?
Commissioners, one last time, you have any questions or comments before we adjourn? All right, hearing none, I entertain a motion for the Board of Commissioners to adjourn. And before we do that, our next meeting will be held with the Cleveland County Board of Commissioners. The next meeting of the Cleveland County Board of Commissioners will be held Tuesday, September the 6th of 2022 at 6 p.m. in the Commissioners' Chambers. And the Commissioners' Chamber is located in 311 East Marion Street. So with that, I entertain a motion for the board to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. We're adjourned.
Again, thank you, commissioners, for being here. Enjoyed having you. Board, we will be recessed for, let's say, till 7:25. We'll reconvene in the auditorium to finish out our business. All right, thank you. All right, the meeting of the Cleveland County Board of Education is called back to order. Next item on the agenda is public participation. And our first speaker is Brandon Bridges. Mr. Bridges?
Mr. Chairman, did you say how many public participations we had?
4.
Good evening. Appreciate y'all coming out today. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to say thank you for making the auditoriums happen. I know that you've got a lot of grants that keep pushing the price down and have made them almost free. And those auditoriums have been on the books for a long time. I know that. They've been talked about for a long time. For quite a while, there was a time where the only time anybody really cared about talking about it was right before the election. But you guys have got together and found a way to make it happen, and I appreciate it. I've not been in high school since 2009, but there's kids out there. I saw probably 2 school board meetings ago. There's a bunch of kids from some sort of theater class or something from one of the other schools that actually had an auditorium, and they was going for something, some sort of scholarship or some sort of recognition. And I just thought to myself how the Burns and Crest students didn't have an opportunity to do that, even though it don't hold any interest for me. And I'm glad that they will have the opportunity to do that here in a year or two. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. And one other thing that I was coming up here to talk about that I've talked about before is the school nutrition program. And I'm sure I sound like a squeaky wheel or you're tired of hearing about it, but it's worth looking into. I promise you it's worth looking into. I don't have any skin in the game on this, and the only reason I care about it is because it's the same, and I think it's even worse than it was whenever I was in school. I've talked to the guy over the Greenville County School Systems and his food. I've connected with people on LinkedIn that are from other school systems. I don't have anything to do with school nutrition. I send them messages. What are you doing to try to make it better? I'm just a citizen, and I can't do anything about it. But, you know, when you get up here and you talk about it, and, you know, I had, you know, one person come up last school board meeting and spoke about it. And I realize that you guys have hired a new nutrition director, and I hope that they have a lot of success and pay attention to some of the things that these other locations are doing to try to make things better. But nobody asked for sirloin steaks or ribeye steaks or filet mignon. That was never something that was brought up. And nobody wants better school food for the kids that pay for it neither. You know, if you talk to the fellow that's over the Greenville County School Systems and the food he has, he actually likes the schools that he has that have people on free lunch because it's guaranteed money. And if anybody needs better food, it's the people that get free lunch, because those kids are some of the kids that don't have something to eat at home. You know, that's one of the things that you have to think about. And I just implore you, please, to take another look into the school food nutrition. You know, if you got the auditoriums done, I appreciate that. If you got those done, there's people that didn't think they could get that done 10 years ago. But people kept talking about it, and somebody got a fire lit under them, and y'all got it done. So you can do the same thing with school nutrition. I know you can. Just take a look. Read some more about it instead of trying to come up with excuses as to why we can't do it. Start looking into ways that we can do it. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Next is Marjorie Hooper.
Good evening. It would be in your best interest to put Ronnie Gregg on the agenda for the next meeting, since you will not, for whatever reason, accompany him to attend the in-service in Greenville regarding the school lunch program he proposes to institute here in Cleveland County Schools. You would do well to listen to him for more than a mere 3 minutes. When he is elected and seated here on the board, he will continue to push for this school lunch program. We don't want to hear any excuses such as school can't afford this program when the program is reimbursed by the government. And now let's talk about some money. Still to this date, no one has explained where the COVID relief $64 million has gone. If you put it in a money fund, fine. We know that we saw tonight that there's a need for over $100 million for our schools. We also have learned that you received a grant for Shelby High School for $2.2 million. Where did that money go? Crest High School got a grant for how much? 2 point something. Did any of that money go to the American Legion World Series Corporation? Did it? If it did, you can't explain to me, you cannot tell me that there's a single child in this school district that benefited from any of those grants. You're receiving money from the state, it's supposed to be going to the children, and the children are not benefiting from this. You have a lot to explain. You have a lot to explain. So I vote no confidence in those of you who voted to spend this money in squandering wherever it went. So shame on you.
Next is Robert Williams.
Robert Williams, I live in Falston. I always clap when a member of the public gets up and gives their opinions, whether they're favorable or not. I think public participation needs to be encouraged and not discouraged. In talking about public participation and publics need to know, I noticed that each one of you seemed to have a handout from the presenters that we just listened to in the first part of this meeting. That was not made public. So, I mean, no member of the public that I know of had a copy of that they could speak to. And I'm not so sure that a lot of you guys didn't have it until too late to really know anything. But toward the end of the previous meeting, adding up the cost, went up to what, $148 million. Mr. Blanton brought up, hey, we spent $34 million. I would add $35 more million for the auditoriums. My arithmetic came up with about $217 million. And we still don't have swimming pools at Burns and Crest. We still don't have equal facilities. I talked a little bit to some of the presenters after the previous meeting during the recess. And I had some questions to them about some things that I don't have time to mention here and before the time runs out. But hey, they said we didn't consider that, some things. But I think there were a lot of things that weren't considered. And we're going to spend $217 million, and we're still going to have 27 50-plus-year-old schools. And they suggested that this be reviewed in 10 years, and we'll have 65-year-old schools. New HVAC systems typically have a 20-year life, so I figure that we're going to keep all the same schools we got for another 20 years, and we're pushing 75 years. So we're just pushing the ball down the road, kicking the can down the road. So that's all I have. I'll give you 10 seconds.
Next is Ronnie Gregg.
Good evening. Last month I gave y'all some information about a program out of Greenville that's been working for quite a while now. Even gave you a sign-up sheet, see if you guys want to go down there and see this nutritional program. And Mr. Blanton, I appreciate you being the first to sign up. Rodney, I do hope that you get to go in September when we go. But nobody else even contacted me to say yay or nay. Since the last meeting, Greenville was voted the best food program in the nation, and they started serving Angus beef. Now that's not, you talk about steak and filet mignon, but it is stuff that kids want to eat. Meatballs, meatloaf, beef tacos, beef nachos, cheeseburgers, subs, short rib sliders, brisket nachos. That's just a few things. But all we heard here last month was talk about a chicken pot pie and about how you're going to give larger servings to the children. Now, I got a text after that, and one of the parents said, giving larger servings of something that's not being ate really makes no sense. Another parent said, the landfill is full of food from the schools because the kids don't eat it. Another person that works for the school system said, we'd love to cook for the kids, but we don't have anything to cook with anymore. We don't even have trays to put the food on. Now, we've all seen what these kids eat. All of you've seen it before. And I mean, these kids, we demand better for these kids. You had a chance to bring the parents together and to bring this board together by going and looking at this program that pays money back to the school system. But you opted out. Y'all make more excuses as to why you can't do things than you can about finding out how to do things. Think outside the box for once, and you might be able to do a little bit more for this community. But by not going, you showed these parents y'all don't really have any interest. I've got a sign-up sheet that's got a lot of parents' names, business owners that are going to be making this trip with me. So When we get back, I'll be glad to let them come talk to you and let you know what they think about all of it. Thank you.
Just want to take a moment to clarify a couple things. Cleveland County Schools actually received $70 million in COVID relief money, and we've had reports posted on our website for months. It's the same report we turn into the state every month of exactly what's been expended of those ESSER funds. So that's available on the website. If you have trouble finding it, you're welcome to call the central office and get some assistance. Also, the facility study that was presented tonight is on the website. And again, if you have any trouble finding that, you're welcome to call the central office. Next on the agenda is approval of the previous meeting minutes. There are two sets of minutes. One is for the July 25th business and closed session, and the second is for the July 25th closed session. What's the pleasure of the board? I assume that's for both, correct? Motion by Mr. Fitch. Is that you, Mr. Hunt? Second. Any questions or discussion? Those in favor, if you'd raise your hand. That carries 9-0. We'll move on to committee reports. The Finance and Personnel Committee did not meet since our last meeting. Their next meeting will be September 2nd at 10:30 a.m., but we do have the personnel report to approve. That does include the substitutes list and the standard personnel report. What's the pleasure of the board?
I need to excuse myself.
Okay, Mr. Blanton is recused.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Taylor. I'm going to give that to Ms. Green. Well, it's personnel, so there's no questions or comments. Those in favor, if you'd raise your hand. That carries 8-0.
Mr. Chair, I do have a
Yes, sir.
question on personnel, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I'd just like to have an update where we're at for the start of school, or will that be covered later on in our superintendent updates?
We're in a really good place. We've got a few positions.
Hold up, she needs to come up here.
Yeah. Do you mind coming to the microphone, please?
We're in a really good place. I feel good about where we are for the start of school. We have about 4 classroom teacher positions that we're still looking to fill and working on that. But for the most part, other than that, we're in a good place. We've got quite a few teacher assistant and custodian positions that we're still looking to fill and working through those. The majority of those, we have a sub that can help in that spot while we work to permanently fill it. But most important thing when you're thinking about coming back is that we have somebody in that classroom, and so we're in a really good place there.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I got one question.
Mr. Blank?
Well, I've heard that one of the schools that we got about 1,200 children at, they don't have but 2 cafeteria workers. How is 2 people gonna feed 1,200 kids, children? Somebody's gonna have to work.
All right, which school is it?
Kings Mountain High School, by what I was told at the
not
last
aware of
meeting,
that.
that they don't have but 2 employees in the food and nutrition. That's gonna be tough. We got to do something to get them some help.
Well,
I will be happy to talk to Ms. Courier about that, but the last conversation we've had, she felt good about where we were with staffing too in the cafeteria.
Okay, well, I just wanted to, don't want to work them to kill them.
Thank you, Dr. Wampa.
Thank you.
Just correction, that's just hearsay. That's not facts,
Right,
right?
we
I just
don't- we don't
I just-
know you.
No, it came from that came from pretty straight source.
Yeah, that's still.
It ain't hearsay.
By definition.
Not where it come
All right.
from.
Dr. Fisher, looks like you have something to add.
I would, Mr. Chair, I just received some information that Kings Mountain High School is fully staffed, so I'm not sure where that information come from, but the information from our child nutrition director is that Kings Mountain High School is fully staffed.
Well, is 2 classified as full staff?
No, sir, they're fully staffed, so I'm not sure where that information's come from, but the information that I got is they're fully staffed.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is our educational programs report. Mr. Humphries.
So the Education Program Committee met on August the 5th Ms. Peeler shared information related to Cleveland County Schools Head Start program. She shared the Policy Council financial information, minutes for the months of April and May, and the Head Start end-of-year status report for the 21-22 school year. All the items she presented are action items requiring board approval. The committee unanimously supported the action, and the information will be recommended tonight to the board. Tamara Goforth presented Cleveland County Schools North Carolina Comprehensive Continuous Improvement Plan. Mr. Goforth's presentation included information about the funding sources included in our plan. Title I, Part A provides federal dollars to schools to supplement, not supplant, educational opportunities for disadvantaged children. Title II, Part A is intended to increase student academic achievement by improving teacher and principal quality. Title III is intended to help ensure the English learners attain English language proficiency and meet state academic standards. The purpose of the Title IV grant is to provide all students with access to a well-rounded education to improve school conditions for student learning and to improve the use of technology in order to improve the academic achievement and digital literacy of all students. The committee supported the implementation of the district's plan, and the NCC CIP will be shared with the board tonight for approval. Mr. Gilmore shared the goals and action steps for the Cleveland County Schools Family and Community Engagement Plan. The committee strongly supported the direction Mr. Gilmore was going with family and community engagement and appreciates his work with our PALS program. With no other business, the meeting was adjourned, and the next Education Program Committee is Friday, September the 2nd at 10:30.
Thank you, Mr. Humphries. There are two action items out of educational programs. First is the Head Start report approvals. That includes the Policy Council summary, the financial report for April, financial report for May, a May 2022 report to, I don't know what PC and SB are. Do you know those acronyms? Ms. Peeler? Yes, okay. Stage fright, I guess. And then we have the end of the year status report. So there's 5 reports that all 5 come from committee, recommended for approval, needs no second. Any questions or discussion? Those in favor, if you'd raise your hand. That carries 9-0. Next is the NCCIP approval. Again, this comes from committee, recommended for approval. Any questions or discussion? Those in favor, if you'd raise your hand. And that carries 9-0. There's no operations committee report. Next operations committee is September 2nd at 9 a.m. Also, there's no policy report. The next policy committee is Tuesday, August 30th at noon. We do have a few policies for approval that were on first read last meeting. There's 4 policies. 4130 is out of county admission. Policy 4700 and 4700R, and policy 3450, which is class rank. Again, those come from committee, recommended for approval. Any questions or discussion? Those that approve, you'd raise your hand. Carries 9-0. There's no safety report. Next safety committee meeting is Wednesday, August 31st at noon. And we're down to the superintendent's update. Dr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Just a few quick updates tonight. Teachers did come back to work today. Our 10-month staff came back to work today, had a great day today. Had the opportunity to visit 4 schools. I was at Crest High School, Elizabeth Elementary, Bethware Elementary, and North Elementary. Saw faculty meetings, saw folks doing letters training, so just a lot of excitement, people being back to the building. Just a couple things. Today was the 4th day of school for Cleveland Early College. I've had the opportunity to go by there twice since they've been in session. Things are going well at that school. Cleveland County Football Jamboree is Friday night, so a lot of exciting things going on in our county. Next Wednesday, just a reminder, is the first day of school for our K-12 students in all of our schools, with the exception of early college, because they will have been in session. So things are going well. Appreciate the work. Just want to highlight a couple things. Question about personnel. You hear lots of things across the state and different districts on the news in terms of staffing, and staffing is a concern. But our human resources team, our principals have done a phenomenal job of making sure we're ready to start school with a lot of anticipation. I did want to follow up from just a question just a minute ago. I do have the names. We do have 7 staff members in child nutrition at Kings Mountain High School. Several of those are full-time. We do have 2 or 3 of those out of that 7 that are sub part-time, but we do have 7 folks on that team. So not sure where that information is coming from, but wanted to correct any
Thank you.
illegitimate information. So be glad to try to answer any of the questions from an update perspective, but we're looking forward to a good week and a half of teacher work days and making final preparations for school, and then starting with everybody on the 17th.
Any questions for Dr. Fisher? Mr. Blankman?
Are we looking pretty good on our resource officers for our safety in our schools?
Yes, sir.
What is, could you tell us what we are covered and what we're not?
I think that's probably a better opportunity to discuss in our safety committee.
Closed session.
In terms of closed session and safety committee.
Okay.
Were you going to present the resolutions?
Yes. Well, I shouldn't do 2 things at one time.
That's right.
I do have, next item is 2 resolutions. We do have a resolution a resolution of appreciation for our elected officials. You have a copy of that resolution at your spots. We have a resolution of appreciation for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. First, I'll read the resolution for our state elected officials and then DPI. Whereas the Cleveland County Board of Education desires to create an exceptional educational experience for our students and works to prepare students to be successful in their post-secondary careers, and whereas in these efforts the Board of Education attempts to create and maintain a culture that is conducive to ensuring that Cleveland County is a great place to live, work, learn, and play, and whereas our mission and vision focuses on cultivating excellence in all that our school system does, and whereas as educational leaders cultivating excellence can be measured in the impact we have on our students and the lives of our peers and in the influence in our community. And whereas the Cleveland County Board of Education and Cleveland County Schools have been generously supported by the county's elected officials at the state and local level, and whereas Cleveland County Schools was recently awarded needs-based public schools capital grant funds to build auditoriums on the campuses of Burns High School and Crest High School, and whereas our state elected officials have been instrumental in the district's ability to obtain ongoing financial support for numerous programs, projects, and endeavors, and whereas our state elected officials have continued to support the mission and vision of the Cleveland County Board of Education and to enhance the board's ability to lead through a culture of cultivating excellence. Whereas our state elected officials have given unselfishly of their time, effort, and energy to support public education in Cleveland County and throughout our state. Now therefore it be resolved that the Cleveland County Board of Education and Cleveland County Schools recognize and extends our sincere appreciation to Speaker Tim Moore, Senator Ted Alexander, and Representative Kelly Hastings for their support, vision, and extraordinary service to Cleveland County Schools, adopted by the Cleveland County Board of Education this 8th day of August 2022. A similar resolution, and I'll highlight just the changes. If you look down at the 6th whereas the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction has been instrumental in the district's ability to obtain ongoing financial support, and whereas the officials at North Carolina Department of Public Instruction have given of their time, effort, and energy, and we be resolved that Cleveland County Board of Education and Cleveland County Schools recognize and extends our appreciation to the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. So we respectfully submit these 2 resolutions of appreciation to extend our thank you to the work being done at the Department of Public Instruction and by our state officials, especially as it relates to our needs-based public schools capital fund grant.
Supposed to sign them all.
Okay, Board, you have 2 resolutions before you. We can entertain a motion to take one each one separately or both together.
Make a motion we approve both together.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Taylor, second by Mr. Shores. Any questions or discussion? There is room on both resolutions for each board member's signature, so do you have a clean copy?
Yes, sir, we'll get that to you.
All right, so assuming it approves, just hang out and make sure you get a chance to sign. Any other questions or discussion? Those in favor, if you'd raise your hand. Carries 9-0. Next is board member comments. We'll start on the right. Mr. Fitch, you have anything? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Glover?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple words I want to say. It's an exciting time when school starts. One of my favorite times, I guess also when the end of the school year, graduation is also another favorite time. But there's a lot of excitement in the county and in the county school system. I had the pleasure last week to go and visit a few schools, and not to leave anybody out, but had the pleasure to go to Elizabeth Elementary School and spend a couple hours there to see all the work that has been done. And I think they've done a really great job from the leadership over there with the principal. It's just outstanding. She has 100% buy-in, it seems like, from the staff. And our maintenance staff has done an incredible job. But also, it's the people that sometimes we forget. The custodians over there were unbelievable. I mean, they were really, really working. When I got there, there's two of them on their knees in the hallway, just doing them little fine touch parts that is just remarkable. I want to give a shout out. I'm not going to mention their names, but there were 3 young men there that are seniors at Shelby High School that they had hired over the summertime to work. And they were really bragging. It just wasn't the principal bragging. It was everybody was bragging on these 3 young men. And in just the 2 hours that I was there was no sitting around horse playing with these teenagers. They were working, and they get a sheet every day with some tasks that needs to be taken care of at that school, and they have been unbelievably good to work there. It was pretty remarkable. I got to talk to them for a little bit because I didn't want to bother them because they were working so hard. But 2 of those were using the money that they made this summer to go on a trip with their school at Shelby High School later on. So I thought that was really good that they were using that, working so hard to use that money for a school trip. So I think they were planning on going, I guess it was a school trip, but they was wanting to go to Japan is where they was going. So I thought that was really remarkable that they were using that time on our school and using the resources to be able to fund that. But exciting time, looking forward to being in more schools. I probably won't be out here visiting on the first day because they got more things to worry about than me and entertaining me. So I wish everybody luck and pray for a safe year. Thank you.
Mr. Humphries. Mr. Shore. Mr. Blanton.
Yes, I went around to some of the schools, and they have been a lot of work done around them. And I'd also like to say of organization here in this county is doing something very special for our starting back to school. The Parents Against Bullying. They are putting book bags together, and they're filling them up with materials for those children to use. And they're passing them out this Saturday out of church, and to give them to go back to school. And if somebody needs a fresh haircut, they might get a fresh haircut. But I want to thank them for what they have done for the children of Cleveland County. It's not just one school, it's for all schools.
Ms. Green. Mr. Taylor. I just got 2 quick things. A few of us got to observe the active shooter training at Washington Elementary a couple of weeks ago. It's nothing that, well, it's something we hope never happens here. Mr. Hunt was there, Mr. Taylor. We were in a position that we were actually got to sit in the rooms and watch the scenarios happen. We got to hear the radio calls. I've been a first responder for almost 40 years, and that's a call you never want to hear come over the radio, that you have an active shooter in some part of an elementary school. So that kind of brought it home for me, is just hearing that on the radio. Granted, it was a training scenario. The dispatcher was fairly calm, but I can just imagine what that's going to be should it ever happen. But really like to thank our SROs for the training they put together. Is Mr. Edders, he lieutenant? Is it lieutenant or Lieutenant Edders, for running that program, for allowing us to observe. If something ever happens, you can rest assured we've got the folks in Cleveland County that's going to take care of business. Also, thank you to our officers in the back for what you do and for being willing to take care of that situation. So we're in good shape with our SROs. I do get to brag on my alma mater just a little bit. I saw Principal Shields last week, and he was grinning from ear to ear. Crest had moved from 50% proficient to 65% proficient in their test scores in 1 year. And I'm sure we'll hear more information on that as we go forward in a few meetings. But congratulations to Crest High School, all the teachers and staff that did that work and for that growth. I believe all our schools had a little bit of growth over the past year. So with that, we did add a closed session for a transfer hearing. Mr. Shores?
Yes, I move we go into closed session pursuant to General Statute 143-318.11A, subsection 1, to discuss this confidential student matter.
Is there a second? Second. Second by Mr. Fitch. Those in favor, if you'd raise your hand. That carries 9-0. We'll move to the conference room. Do we have a motion to re-enter open session? I'm going to pick Mr. Umphreys on that one. Who seconds that?
I'll say it.
All right. Those in favor of returning to open session, if you'd raise your hand. That carries 9-0. During closed session, the board discussed 2 confidential student matters, transfer hearings, and that's the end of the report. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
All in favor, you can leave.